I was really excited when the bishop asked me to share something about the apparently contradictory parts of my life, specifically my faith and my job. I work as a science teacher at a couple of local colleges. I'm not the only scientist who's a Christian. I've worked with several colleagues, Neston High School, Wirral Met College, and last but by no means least, my uncle was a professor of pharmacology at Queen's University Belfast. I grew up in Morton. I went to Christchurch Primary, Lingham Middle, Oxley, and then Carlett Park. And I've worked in the pharmaceutical and food industries as a chemist. Then I retrained as a teacher, secondary science. I started trying to think of some amazing science facts I could tell you that might help you believe that there is a God. One of my personal favourites, I'm going to get my plant again. One of my personal amazing science facts is photosynthesis. It's a very big word. It just means making with light. It's the word we use to describe how plants, like this one, turn a gas, an invisible odourless gas, carbon dioxide, together with liquid water. They turn it into solid sugar, and then the sugar is turned into plant. Give a human carbon dioxide and water. This is the best we can do. Fizzy water. We can't make plants. We can't make trees. This is all we can do with it. There are lots of very famous scientists who aren't Christians, very well known, very well liked. Brian Cox, for example, invited into most of your homes on a weekly basis at the moment. I've met him. He's a really nice guy. We should pray for him, those of us that are Christians. Imagine what impact he could have as a Christian speaker. So I can't compete with him. What about giving my testimony? There isn't that much to tell. I've only ever been to prison to visit. All of my relatives practically are born-again Christians, including 2 sets of missionaries in Africa. I became a Christian. I made my own personal decision at the age of 16. I'd been to hear Nicky Cruz at Chester. And if you don't know his story, it's the one from The Cross and the Switchblade. He grew up in gangland America. He has a very powerful testimony. So what can I contribute here tonight? Well, so many people see that Christianity is based on superstitions. It's myths. You can't prove it. And anyway, science disproves it. Well, I hope I can give you my perspective on why that is not the case. Scientists base their beliefs on evidence. They develop a theory and then they test it. The results of their experiments determine whether there was any validity in their theory, i.e., were they right or were they wrong. The history of science is full of ideas which we now no longer believe are true. For example, the Earth is not flat. The Sun does not orbit the Earth. Playing the piano a lot as a child does not mean that your children will have big hands. And yet all of these ideas were widely believed and taught for centuries. I have never found any point of proven science fact to contradict anything in my faith. Timescales are often bandied about. You Christians believe the earth is only 4,000 years old. Haven't scientists proved that's not true? That's open to debate. And for those of you that want to go into the minutiae of the scientific detail, I'm around afterwards. But let me just say, I've never had a problem with the 7 days of creation. It says in Psalm 90, verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or a watch in the night. Some churches choose to take those 7 days literally, others take it figuratively. But as long as you accept that God did it, does the time scale really matter? I have to teach about the evolution of the Earth's atmosphere. It's one of the latest topics in the GCSE science. I have to explain that the early Earth's atmosphere was poisonous. There was no way it could sustain life. It took a lot of plants to produce enough oxygen to sustain life. Now, funnily enough, this is mentioned in Genesis chapter 1. Verse 11, then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning. That was on the 3rd day. On the 4th day, God adjusted the light. Do you remember I said photosynthesis means making with light? The byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. And God knew that the life he was creating was going to require that oxygen, so he created the plants first. Scientists got quite excited a few years ago when they all finally agreed that life started in the oceans, took to the air, and then arrived on the land. They published it. There was a big hoo-ha in the press. Christians sat there very smug, going, we knew that 4,000 years ago. The order of creation, again from Genesis, starts with life in the seas. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God saw that all he had made, and it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Scientists think they discovered this, but God was way ahead of them. One of my favourite biblical characters is Gideon. He was a bit of a scientist. He did some experiments to prove his theory. In Judges 6, Gideon says to God, if you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew. A bowl full of water. Now, being a good scientist, Gideon knew that experiments should be repeatable. But it was possible this was just a coincidence. Bit of dew here, not a lot of dew there, so he changed the parameters. He said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and the ground wet. That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry, the ground was covered with dew. That gave Gideon the proof he needed that God was real. Now, I'm not suggesting you try that particular experiment with God. I mean, how many of you own a threshing floor? But you can ask God for something in prayer and see what happens. Be warned, though, He doesn't always answer our prayers the way we expect. God is far more concerned about saving our souls than our frail human bodies. Back to me, though. Where is my recent evidence for my continuing faith in God? Well, I specifically asked to be introduced as simply Helen. For those of you that were here last week, you may remember the testimony of Michael O'Brien. My name is Helen O'Brien. He's my husband. If you missed his testimony, you can access it under the Media tab on the Come to the Light website. We've been married now for 17 years, and the changes in his life give me proof every day of God's goodness. I'd like to tell you a joke. God was sitting in heaven one day when a scientist said to him, "God, we don't need you anymore. Science has finally figured out a way to create life out of nothing. In other words, we can do what you did in the beginning." "Oh, is that so?" "Tell me," replies God. "Well," says the scientist, "we can take dirt and form it into the likeness of you and breathe into it, thus creating man." "Well, that's very interesting," says God. "Show me." So the scientist bends down to the earth and starts to mould the soil into the shape of a man. No, says God. "Create your own dirt." I hope you didn't think that was irreligious. It was my lead-in to my big finale. The elephant in the room that I've ignored for long enough. What about the Big Bang, I hear you ask? Well, I have a lovely picture in my mind of God turning to Jesus and the Holy Spirit at the beginning of day one. We know that they were there because it says in John chapter 1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and the life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." So back to day one. God might have said to Jesus and the Holy Spirit, "You may want to cover your ears. This could get noisy." After God called the universe into being, Jesus looks at him and smiles. "Yes, Dad, that was a Big Bang." Thank you.